I'm so happy to have a chance to talk with you.
I'm delighted to be here. Thank you for inviting me, Andrew.
I'm so excited to introduce you and nonviolent communication to our students in our Friend Magic class. And I wanted to, first of all, just ask you how you got into nonviolent communication.
I think I was looking for nonviolent communication from very early in my life. I grew up in Israel, as you may imagine. It's quite intense place with a lot of violence. I was looking for tools on how to live in peace and how to love both myself and others. And that search took me on many journeys that I think the eureka moment where I can say I found it was when I arrived in California at the end of 2007 and was introduced to it. Someone just gave me the CD from Dr. Marshall Rosenberg, and 5 minutes into watching this video where he was teaching it in San Francisco, the year 2000, that was the video, I knew this was it, because it was finally finding a really practical way to take all these big ideas about being kind and being honest and being compassionate and translating it into, okay, what do I say? What do I do? How do I show that to the other person, especially in a moment of conflict? So that combination of bringing the ideas of nonviolence into communication and language, that was like, I was sold.
Wow. And did you start noticing any differences in your life after you learned NVC?
Oh, yeah. I think one of the things that for me was most compelling about this work is how empowering it is. So I think those longings and needs to have harmony, or to know how to help someone when they're in distress, or to know how to understand my needs and feelings, they were there all the time. But finally, I got the tools. I got the how to. So I had very young kids at that time, and I think it really impacted my capacity to build trust with my kids and stay connected to them. It helped me connect with myself and know what I need and how to ask for what I need and how to include myself, especially being mom. And I remember just having a lot of pain when I would find myself raising my voice on my kids as a parent, and hearing kind of my mom's words coming out of my throat unconsciously. And there was that gap between where I was and where I wanted to be. And so finding the words that would help me align my intention and how I wanted to show up with care for my kids just was such a relief and such a gift.
What did you notice when you introduced these concepts to your kids?
I noticed that they actually leave this consciousness. It's almost like we are being born in this way. My kids, when they were very young, they didn't have any capacity to judge. They would just share the observations, like share what people said, give a quote, or what people did in a descriptive way. So it's almost like they invited me to learn from them. And I noticed also that they responded immediately to that. They felt so much more safe and connected when I use non-judgmental language to express my needs, when I'm able to see what they're doing that is contributing to me and acknowledge that. And a lot of just doing the repair work. That's, I think, a lot of what parents end up doing is just, we are overworked, we are overstretched, we are beyond capacity. There aren't all these support systems around that we can rely on. So it ends up just being able to show up and acknowledge and repair. And that makes a huge difference, because we all have capacity to live with unmet needs, including our children. And when we acknowledge that we did something or said something that contributed to an impact, it's healing and the trust is being restored.
That's really beautiful. Absolutely makes sense. And did you notice, did they take on this style of communication with their friends as well?
I think at the beginning, they were just, this is where they grew up, so they're not noticing anything. But as they started to go to schools and engage with systems outside home, they started to notice the difference. And it's just so moving. Now, actually, my kids tell me that maybe the most precious gift that I offer to them in their life is NVC, because they have more tools to know how to navigate challenges in their relationships and how to support others. And those tools are not being taught at school. And they are noticing how stress it brings to their friends when you don't know what to do. You only have the either or option. You either give up yourself or you give up the other person.
Wow. And did you see a difference in the quality of their relationships based on their ability to communicate with NVC principals?
Absolutely. I'll give you an example. My daughter in 7th grade, one day she comes home and she tells me that they're having a play. They used to have the yearly annual play. And in that play, there is a word, a slur word, that she's not comfortable with that word. And she's telling me that she tried to talk to her teacher about it, and her teacher didn't seem to really take her seriously, or just told her, oh, live with it, or something like this. And that's something that many times happens, right? Kids' needs or kids' opinions are not being taken seriously by the adults. And so she decided to write a letter with her friends, with respect to the teacher, without calling him names, without judging him, just telling him, I feel very uncomfortable. We feel very uncomfortable with this, and we're not actually willing to perform in this play if this word, and this is why we want care for everyone. And we don't want to compromise care by using this language. And then making a request, which is the most empowering piece. Would you be willing to find another word, for us to come up with another word to replace that word so that we can participate? And that worked. And actually at the end of the year, this teacher wrote in her report card when they give a review as one of the things that he noticed as a strength about my daughter, that she could offer what he called criticism with respect, and that he thought that would be such a skill that will serve her in her life. And for me, a situation like this happens 10 times a day for kids, and there is so much disempowerment. You either have to suck it up or rebel and lose connection and get punished. And so it was so inspiring to see that she could use these skills very naturally and make it work for everyone.
Tell me, when you're introducing this concept to kids, what are the most important things to get across to them, or how do they most readily grasp this notion of NVC?
One interesting experience I've had in the last few years is being an educational consultant to animation kids shows. And I've been working with writers and just offering feedback on the episodes. And we've worked a lot with this question, like how do you present it to kids in a way that is actually authentic and real and doesn't feel awkward? And these are like preschool kids, so it's very young kids. You're not gonna go into like many words. And what was interesting is that we were able to find very simple language. It really, sometimes it's not even in the words, it's just the intention, it's just the consciousness that make this magic works. So it depends on the age group of how I would present it. With very young kids, it would be mostly through games and play and just very simple empathy guesses, and really delivering that consciousness of you matter to me, and I'm interested in your experience, and I want to cross that bridge into your world and be there with you, and non-judgment. If we can only integrate that piece of NVC, shifting from right, wrong thinking, judgmental language, and then we can collaborate to find solutions that work both for you and for me. And because there are power differences, it's very important that I make it safe for the kids to show up authentically and speak their truth, show them that I'm not going to punish them for that.
Wow. It's really exciting to me. I've seen how magical these concepts can be with healing misunderstandings and healing relationships, and so exciting to see it with kids. Having worked with kids and adults, do you have a sense of, do they tend to get it at the same speed, or do kids get it more easily than adults?
Kids are much faster.
Really?
It's easier.
Really?
That's why, one of the reasons why I love working with young people. For adults, I think there's a lot of unlearning to do, much more years of social conditioning. So it's harder. That's why Gandhi said, you want to change the world, start with the kids.
I'm also curious too, from a cultural perspective. I was fortunate enough to have worked for an Israeli company and spent a good amount of time in Israel at one point in my life. And actually, one of the things I really liked about most of the Israeli people I knew is they're very direct with each other, and sometimes in a pretty spicy way. They don't mind confrontation. I wanted to ask, coming from that type of culture over to California, where people tend to be more nuanced or not as direct, what was your experience with NVC in both cultures?
Sometimes I talk about it like this. I would say that in the Israeli or Middle East culture, there is more priority or just authenticity. And here there's more priority on kindness or care. It's not really care, it's a confusion of care. It's more like politeness, which is not really for me necessarily caring, but it's like this kind of don't hurt other people's feelings. And both are costly. If you're just prioritizing authenticity, then your work is to integrate care. There are three pillars to nonviolence. One is love, one is truth, and the third is courage. And so if you come from the, I'm just going to speak my truth, the work is to integrate the love, the care, speak truth with love, with care. And if you come from the, you're very into the pleasing and being polite and smoothing it out for others, your work is to integrate truth and work on authenticity. Because only when it's both are integrated, you step into this consciousness of nonviolence. If you just live in the either or, it's costly.
Super interesting. And it seems like in both cases, too, that third pillar that you mentioned, courage, because it takes courage to change and take a different type of approach.
Yeah.
Is there anything in the fundamentals that you do differently when you're teaching kids versus adults, or is it really the same thing and kids tend to pick it up more quickly?
It's the same thing. It's the same consciousness. They're usually at the less power end. And so a lot of the time I just help them, support them, advocate for them. I'm an ally so that they can feel safe to speak about their needs. And I call out on the teachers and I call out on the parents. I'll give you an example at that project at my son's school, which was a 3-year project. We started to work on changing policies at the school. We realized we had this principal, and next day maybe the principal will be gone, and then NVC or this project will not survive unless you make a change in the system. And the first policy that we chose to work on was about tardiness, because at school they deal a lot with people being late. And the policy that it was in place was punitive. If you're late more than 4 times, you get to go to a Saturday school and work on your homework or sit 4 hours doing nothing. So we did this big process on coming up with a new policy where we brought up in one room the teachers, the administrators, the parents, and the students. At the end of this big process where the kids were sharing their needs behind being late and how they want those needs to be included, the principal, at the end, when I was saying, okay, do we have any final requests? He was turning to one student and referred to her personally saying, I do need to request you not to be late, which was like throwing the whole process from the window. Like the person of power at the end of all of this, after listening to you, telling you that you should not be late, basically. And I just stepped in and told him, what you just did puts everything at risk. Because if I'm the students now, I'm losing trust that you really want to include my needs and that I have any choice in the matter and that I'm not going to be punished. And he got it, but I don't think any of the students could do that. Too risky. So that's something unique that is very present when you work with kids, is to be aware of the power dynamic and know how to compensate for that. And do it without losing trust from the adults, right?
Yeah, that makes so much sense.